Hey guys, welcome back to 30 Days to Your First Website Design, a Tuts Plus premium course. I'm Ian Yates, and today we're going to look further into the planning aspect of things by examining usability. Let's firstly take a look at what we'll be covering in this video. Firstly, we're going to ask ourselves, what is usability? That's going to take us on to familiarity in web design, ultimately then on to user experience, and finally empathy, putting yourself in the shoes of others. And before we stop and jump into the next video, I'm going to give you a little assignment. Okay, so we'll begin with asking our question, what is usability? It can apply to many aspects of life, but it's a term you're going to hear thrown around quite often in web design, and it all boils down to common sense. Usability, in our case, describes the ease of use of a website. Another word you're going to hear a lot of is intuitive. Something which is used intuitively requires no real forethought. Using it is instinctive, easy, it's usable. Familiar interfaces are great examples of good usability. Tabs, for example. We started to think of these as a web design tool, but they originate, of course, from the tabs on files in an office. We're already familiar with using them in real life, so using them as a means of navigation on a website feels intuitive. You'll find them in websites, in applications, they're present in browsers, and for good reason. Now, a website is a vehicle. It's used to perform a function, to convey a message or communicate ideas, and if it does this well, the user will barely even notice the site itself. At the point when a user becomes conscious of what they're doing, starts thinking about how they should be behaving on a website, there's a chance you're going to lose their attention. They become distracted by the how, when really all they should be concerned with is the what. Now, usability isn't universal. What works well for one site doesn't necessarily work well for another. It's entirely reliant on each individual, such as this chap, which is why it's so important to determine who your users are when planning a website. By generalizing your user group, you can approximate their behavior, their desires, their motives, and then get a better idea of how they will deal with your website. We're talking about user experience. When designing a site for your user, you're designing his or her experience. Whereas you, the designer, may analyze a site by its aesthetics or its clever use of JavaScript, and the client might judge a site simply by how much cash it generates, the end user really shouldn't be assessing anything at all. They should just be experiencing it. So who are our users? Well, we're going to need to ask ourselves some questions, such as, for example, how old are they? We're going to need to cater for their visual tastes in order to draw them in, but we may also need to consider their individual usage needs. Perhaps we're dealing with the elderly or the young, in which case font size could be crucial. Where are they from? For example, we're still a long way from global equality where internet is concerned, and some nations are far less accustomed to making online transactions than others. Trust is hugely important when encouraging somebody to tap in their credit card details. Not all countries are like the US, where we can assume a certain level of e-commerce savvy. How will they use a site? Well, increasingly these days, we have to consider the devices our site will be viewed on. That nice jQuery drop-down menu you've built, are you sure it works okay on a touchscreen tablet? If it doesn't, then you're preventing users from accessing crucial navigational elements of your site. Not great on the usability scale. Now, it's all very well saying know your users, but how do we actually do this? Well, you're going to need to practice empathy, putting yourself in the shoes of others. This great article on Web Design Tuts by Paul Boag covers the forgotten skill of doing just that. He talks about empathy in terms of your colleagues, your clients, your users. It's a great article. I suggest you go and check it out. Now, it's classic web designer behavior, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone, to be defensive of your work, to get wound up and irritated by people who see your design differently. It took me a long time to accept that my wife's perception of my design is just as valid as anybody else's. So test your designs on different people, accept constructive criticism, and soon you'll become accustomed to designing through the eyes of a user. Now, while we're on the subject of further reading, I can also recommend you check out Steve Krug's Don't Make Me Think. It's the seminal usability reference, and it makes common sense really seem like common sense. Great book. Go and check it out. And lastly, I'm going to ask you to ask yourself some questions so we can continue to develop our corporate website theme. So have a look at these questions before we jump onto the next video. For example, who is potentially going to be using our site? What will they expect to gain from doing so? And what do we expect from them whilst they're there? Give those questions some thought, and then we can move on to the next section. Next time on 30 Days to Your First Website Design, we're going to look at content. This is Ian Yates, and again from all of us here at Tuts Plus, thank you for listening.